reduce, you get a spike in price. To the extent that you have to factor in a risk premium, if I'm going to deal in drugs, I'm not going to do it for minimum wage. I want to get paid more. What you do, both of those things have a tendency to really rack up the cost of a particular drug. If, on the other hand, they were legal and no one was going to go to jail for doing this, nor was the supply limited, the price for these drugs would drop precipitously. And if that occurred, what would happen to the cartels? They would go bankrupt, would they not?
That's true. Milton was a great man, and he was very generous with his time. I worked closely with him on this issue, and he points out that the law of supply and demand is a lot older and more powerful than any of the laws our politicians will pass, and the end result of criminal prohibition is always going to be the same. It inflates the price of the product, which leads to a lot of profit that goes into the hands of criminal enterprises. And in fact, in some cases, foreign countries where the drugs are produced, it's going into the hands of enemies of the United States, into terrorist groups. And yet we continue to do more and more of what has not worked for centuries.
Well, let me play the devil's advocate for you, all right? I tend to be very sympathetic with you, and I don't think you can do it overnight, and nobody's suggesting you can. The drug warriors, the prohibitionists, have been very, very effective in sort of instituting this mental block where especially people on my side of the aisle, conservatives and law enforcement types, just cannot bring themselves to see a world where drugs might be legal. But yet you look at the contradictions here. The last 3 presidents have admitted they've done drugs, or words to that effect. Parents drink alcohol. Well, high school kids get at about the same level, they try alcohol as marijuana. So there's an hypocrisy effect. You throw in prescription drugs, which are readily available, and one could say, and not to mention the illicit drugs that supposedly prohibition was going to eliminate, they're readily available. One could say that we really have decriminalized drugs. We've just handed over the distribution to violent gangs.
Yeah, I really think that's quite true. This kind of effort would never take place if it was a private corporation which had to depend upon making a profit and making good decisions. But government is a monopoly. Police departments are monopolies. If you're dissatisfied with the police department because they're paying too much attention to marijuana, you can't simply say, well, I'll hire another police department. You're stuck with what you have. And that's what we see is causing the damage, because we started out in 1914 criminalizing drugs, and it was downhill ever since then. And there's no future in it, because we have not been able to cut off the supply, because the demand is so great here in America. No matter what we think, people are going to spend billions of dollars for these drugs, and someone will always be around to supply them. So, it is especially difficult for me to understand conservatives and also liberals who support the drug war, because conservatives supposedly are for less intrusive government, and nothing is more intrusive than the drug war.
Nothing's more intrusive than what I put in my body.
Testimony and a lot of unnecessary arrests.
Nothing's more intrusive than what I choose to put in my body from a philosophical point of view.
Well, that's true. We're supposed to be a free country, and sooner or later we have to say it's something called individual responsibility. So what good does it do if we put someone in jail? The recidivism rate is 77%. Now, there are lots of people who should be in jail, violent criminals, but we mess up the system by concentrating on people whose only crime is what they're putting into their own bloodstream.
I think the mental block here, the Chief McNamara, is the notion, and it's really bizarre to me, because the same people that correctly worry about the federal government imposing its will in the nanny state, i.e. Obamacare. It's a good idea to buy insurance, and if it's a good idea, the federal government ought to tell you to do it. Well, every conservative will tell you that's not true. What are they going to do next? Tell us to exercise? Just because something's a good idea doesn't mean the government should be involved. Well, the same applies to drugs. Just because it isn't a good idea doesn't mean the government should ban it. We don't ban gluttony. We don't ban alcohol. We don't ban lots of things. And so I'm confused as well why more conservatives like Milton Friedman, Bill Buckley, George Shultz, a number of those who have come out for decriminalization aren't chiming in. Politically, I suppose it's still the third.
That's what I was saying before, Jason, because liberals say that they're more concerned about individuals and helping them and doing this and that for their own good, for the good of the people that they're passing all these laws to protect. And they violate their own principles because they're doing tremendous harm to people by arresting them, giving them criminal records and so on, merely because they're using a substance that we don't think they should use. And so the conservatives violate their principles by supporting this kind of irrational government, which has not succeeded in what it says its objectives are, and at the same time is really encroaching on our civil rights and creating a lot of very bad situations in law enforcement. I'm completing a book in which I'm detailing more than 1 million crimes by American police officers, what I call gangster crimes, in the drug war. Instead of the traditional police corruption where cops took a payoff for looking the other way, when it comes to the drug war, there's so much money involved that the cops themselves become gangsters, committing murders, beginning to traffic in drugs, and committing all sorts of crimes that I call gangster crimes, not merely corruption, which is bad enough.
Well, that's exactly what's happened in Mexico.
This is an outcome of the drug war. It started with...
I gotta break, Joseph, but that's exactly what's happened in Mexico. When we come back, let's talk about how much money we could save. Let's talk about whether usage would go up, and let's dispel this myth once and for all that the United States has always prohibited these sorts of illicit drugs. Former chief of police of San Jose for 15 years, criminal justice expert Joseph D. McNamara is our guest. We'll continue with him right after this short pause.